Welcome back to Troubleshooting Agile. Hi there, Jeffrey.
Hi, Squirrel. So, Squirrel, before we started, you mentioned that you were having a funny kind of car trouble. I thought that actually gave us something interesting to talk about.
It is because I have this cool thing, which I think is coming on more and more cars. I hadn't had it before, and it's a continuous indicator about a problem in the car. And the problem in my car is that there's a slow leak, as far as I can tell, in the left rear tire. And what I've noticed is that when I get into the car, there's a little warning light that comes up. And it shows me the car, and it shows me all the tires, and it says, you idiot, this one is too low pressure. You haven't maintained this one right. Go fill it up. And then I noticed, because I didn't immediately do anything about it, being a bit lazy and not a fan of car maintenance, I began driving, because it wasn't that low. It wasn't punctured, right? So it was just a little less than it should be. And I started driving, and the number went up. And I stopped the car and looked around for somebody who might be, sneakily pumping it when I was at stop signs or something. And there was no such person. Then I remembered that it's cold, and when the car drives, it gets warmer. And when things are warmer, they have more pressure. And I think there's Boyle's law, or one of those laws that I learned about
That's right.
in physics, that's warmer gases have greater pressure. So that explains why this indicator was changing, but I thought it was fascinating that, first of all, I was misled by it. I initially forgot this law and didn't follow the indicator and didn't understand what was happening, and also that the indicator was changing over time, which is not something you'd expect. You'd expect the tire to be at a fairly constant pressure, and if there's a slow leak, that it would gradually go down. But this sort of expansion wasn't what I expected. And I thought to myself, gosh, that seems to happen a lot in software teams, in teams of all kinds, that you get misleading indicators. And also that this sort of experience of having a continuous indicator, that's a new thing. We haven't had that in cars quite so much. So what do you think about that, Jeffrey? Is that something our listeners can learn from?
Well, I think that the thing that struck me about it was, as people know from our past episodes, I'm up at the snow, and went to go get in the car with a friend of mine yesterday. We're going to drive up to the slope, and he said, "Oh, we need to stop by a gas station on the way because he has an oil leak, not an air leak, but an oil leak." But the thing that was interesting about it is, in a compare and contrast sense, um, it, the oil leak he has in his car is in some ways similar to the gas leak in your car, or the tire, the air leak. And the difference is not about gas versus liquid, but but actually the interesting thing to me about it is the difference in the sensing, because you're describing something you see on your dashboard every time you get in, and you can watch things change, and you initially characterize it to me as sort of misleading, and the fact that you have this kind of variation that happens. But the thing about it is, my friend with the oil leak is that his car is a little bit older, and it doesn't give him the oil level on the dash. He has to go check it manually, and he does this pretty regularly.
So
But
the
what
listeners
he
who are
said
not
was,
old enough might not know how you do this. You take a stick and you stick it into the tank and you look at the level on the stick. This is how people, before all this cool stuff was invented, actually managed to check oil levels and things. So get off my lawn. Just thought I'd give a old person's point of view. All right, so your friend puts the dipstick in and he's surprised. Why was he surprised?
he's surprised because it has gone through more oil more rapidly than it typically does, and he hadn't checked it for a couple weeks, and he was surprised that it was lower, and he was worried that now he was potentially damaging his engine. And the thing about it is, to me, is the difference between your situation and his situation. It is a lot to do with the type of feedback that because he had to go check it manually, then if he was more likely to be surprised at changes that were bigger than he expected. And he wasn't getting daily feedback the way you do when you drive your car. You can see the tire pressure every day. You can kind of monitor and decide when, despite your dislike of car maintenance, you're actually going to have to do something about it.
I
And
certainly am, no question. But the other thing is, mine's actually really continuous. In other words, as I'm driving down the road, I see it changing. And that was what really struck me and made me doubt. I thought maybe the sensor was bad, because all of a sudden my tire was getting more inflated. I said, I could understand a leak, but why is it getting more inflated? Of course, then I remembered ideal gas laws and things. But what was interesting is that your friend has to wait a couple weeks, or whenever he remembers to stick the dipstick in, Whereas
Yeah.
I don't remember. I certainly never think about whether my tire is inflated or not. I think of my car only as a way of getting from point A to point B. And so something comes and tells me. And so I get
Yeah.
this continuous update that comes to me instead of your friend who has a periodic update, a sporadic update, whenever he remembers. And that part should really resonate for some of our listeners.
And what struck me about that, what resonated with me was it reminds me a lot of at times when we've had postmortems, when there's been an outage and we could do a root cause analysis, and it was pretty common that there'd be something where there was something that people knew was an important value, but that wasn't something that was being systematically reported, and people had to go and check, and then they could then miss changes that happened that were unexpected.
If our server runs out of memory, our whole system will go down and people will ring us and be very angry. So we should check on system memory regularly. Guess what? Nobody remembers to go and check on the system memory.
Yeah, well, exactly. You're kind of describing like the old days pre-DevOps when sysadmins would have big stacks of monitors with a bunch of graphs and they would be manually monitoring the system's health to say like, what's the memory levels or, any kind of data about the functioning system. And that very often that's been replaced by alarms and alerts that will be more proactive. And this is the kind of change that happened. But I think there's other times
You
in
can't get away with
business.
that one. Hang on, Jeffrey. You can't get away with that one because the problem is that you may have all these wonderful charts and graphs and all these fantastic alerts, and they all go right into Slack, and nobody looks at the alerts. So
Yes,
we wound
of
up
course.
in the same situation that you need actual cultural reinforcement that people should do something about this stuff, and you need something that actually goes beep. So I have a lot more faith in an on-call rota and a system that will phone you and wake you up than I do in a system that has all kinds of wonderful charts and graphs and alerts that go to email and Slack and lots of other places. And the problem is people get inured to those. People get used to them, and there's alert fatigue. And what's much better is to have alerts that actually come in your face, like the one in my car, which flashes up and makes a bong and tells me that I should pay attention.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here. You bring in alert fatigue, which is a fair point. If your dash lit up with 25 things that were all slightly off in your car, none of which needed immediate attention, I imagine you might also get a bit tired of it. If everything about your car that changed as it warmed up was an alert when you started it, probably not very helpful. But the general principle here that I think I wanted to focus on was the difference between a metric that you have to go check manually, and a metric that is brought to you automatically. And I wanted to give an example here of a non-technical one, at least certainly less technical than something like the memory sets of your server, because I thought of a different case. A company I worked at, they had a product, and they would sometimes come to renewals and go to renew, and the people would cancel. And it turned out that if they looked back at the usage data, they realized the people had stopped using their product gradually over the course of years. So the number of users had been in decline. And so then they made it a sort of policy that the account managers were supposed to go check usage manually every quarter. And it had the kind of problems you're describing, which is if people missed it, or something happened in between the quarterly checks, they would lose time in reacting to it. And so their solution around the business metrics would do something similar to what we're describing, to have a continuous monitoring that can alert people that when there were changes in the level of usage to be investigated, so that potentially they could intervene earlier to understand what was going on and to see if there was something they could do to turn things around in the account, and so not get surprise cancellations at the end of the term. And so that was
And
the
Jeffrey,
idea of
can I come in there with a question?
oh, absolutely.
So one thing that often happens in these situations is someone will blame the operator. And this often happens with train crashes or airplane crashes or something like that. Somebody will say, well, the pilot forgot to check that the wing was attached, and so it fell off, and so it was the pilot's fault.
Yeah.
And in this case, were the account managers forgetting to check on purpose? Were they just, they didn't think it was important, or they were opposed to the checks, or anything like that? Was there any fault with them in not actually doing the checks that they were supposed to do, that you would think account managers want to because they are measured on renewals?
It's a good question, and I don't have the full history of it, but what I would imagine is, despite whatever the individual, this is quite a large company, that any of the whatever the individual account managers are supposed to do, ultimately management was responsible for the outcomes, and so they made it so that they had a dashboard where they looked at things not only by change in usage, but also by the size of the account under renewal, because their key thing wasn't that maybe some small 5-person account didn't renew, but if any of their behemoth, multi-hundred, multi-thousand user accounts were surprise cancellations, that would be quite a big deal for the company.
And that's the fix once you've detected the problem. But I'm thinking of the time when people were still in dipstick mode, right, where they were manually
Yeah,
going and checking and there wasn't an alert on their dashboard. My assumption would be that those account managers were motivated. And when they realized, they said, oh, it's one of those Homer Simpson moments. Oh, I can't believe I didn't check. If I'd only checked,
yeah.
then I would have known. Am I right about that, or am I misunderstanding the situation?
You're exactly right, and I've coached various people in sales organizations and in account management, and I know what happens is that it can be very easy to ignore the silent account, right, where everything seems fine, uh, uh, and you're dealing with the ones that are more in firefighting mode, and unfortunately, these things don't tend to line up nicely throughout the year, so you have one crisis at a time, so it can be easy to lose sight of an account. And something like this is the where the checking the dipstick analogy is a good one. It's not that you don't want to check it, but you think, well, I'll check it tomorrow or I'll check it next
Mm-hmm.
week, and
Yep.
then some other crisis comes on, and next thing you know, it's been 3 months since, and then when you check it, you get the unpleasant surprise, a bit like my friend had when he went and checked his oil yesterday morning.
Absolutely. So, what could our listeners do with that? It seems to me that our listeners could think to themselves, "What's that stuff I really should do?" I always call it the really shoulds. And I really should check the dips. I really should cycle the tires. I really should put the chains on to go up north. Oh, I'll do that tomorrow. Oh, I'll get to it. Oh, I will address that funny bug, but for right now, I'll just hit snooze on the alarm, right? I will ignore this particular problem today. I'll restart the service, or I'll turn it off and on again, and we'll fix it properly someday. And those some days don't tend to come along. Now, some of them are actually perfectly fine to do that with. You probably should just stop doing whatever it is, and it probably doesn't matter. So there's lots of those that wind up in your backlog, and that's why I always tell my clients that they should strongly consider deleting their entire backlog and then seeing what actually matters to them in their software team. But there are some that really do matter, and it would be worth looking back at those and saying, is this a dipstick? Is this something that we're just not checking often enough? We're not paying a close enough attention, and it's going to come and bite us sometime, because that actually might be higher in importance. And because it's silent, because you have a way to work around it, just like in those sales situations, you might never know it until it comes in and actually causes an outage or some major catastrophe.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I think it's a question of one is thinking about of those, I like your really shoulds, understanding those things where you want to make the investment in a system. And to me, that's always the main thing I look at is, what's your system for solving this problem, and how are you going to refine your system iteratively to make sure that you are getting things in a timely fashion, and also that you're avoiding the problem you mentioned earlier of alert fatigue, where you don't have so many things blaring at you that actually don't need attention, that you get blinded to the ones that are really important. So I think that my general approach is around creating systems and then continually refining them to make sure that my attention is being spent on the right things and not being distracted by trivial things. And to me, this is kind of funny to go this thing that I've lived so often in software, and then seeing, in the rise of continuous integration, of continuous monitoring, seeing equivalent things happen in sales, and then now we kind of get kind of come back, and something as mundane as your tire pressure leak and my friend's oil leak are kind of the real world instantiations of the same kind of systems we see in our businesses all the time, and with some similar lessons.
There we go. Well, if our listeners would like advice on their car troubles, probably we're not the people to get in touch with, but you could certainly try. And we'll be Tom and Ray, the car brothers that used to be on National Public Radio sometime soon. But more
Car
seriously,
talk.
if car talk, that's right. If listeners would like to get in touch with us about their system problems, that's probably something we can do more about. So we would love suggestions and ideas. We'd love for you to disagree with us. Maybe you think that alert fatigue isn't really a problem and you need more alerts, or maybe you think that continuous checking is overkill for you and you don't really need it. Tell us what you think, and the best way to do that, of course, is to come on over to agileconversations.com, where you will find our videos and our book and material on conversational dojos and all kinds of other stuff, all free. And, of course, also lots of different ways to get in touch. Email, Twitter, Sora. There's a social app for bots now called Moltbook or something. So I don't know if we're on that yet, but we will be soon, I'm sure. So get in touch, whether you're a bot or a human, at agileconversations.com. And, of course, the other way to keep in touch is to come back again next week when we'll have another edition of Troubleshooting Agile. I know what we're called. Thanks, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Squirrel.